Hello and welcome back. In the previous video, we looked at the architecture of Flume and also the components of a Flume agent. In this video, we will look at configuring a Flume agent to extract data from a server log file. Now earlier we saw that at a minimum for a Flume agent we need to perform the following tasks, that is, specifying the definition of the flow and also configuring the individual components such as source, channel and sink. Now let us go through some of these tasks in detail by using an example. So let us extract from a server log file. So as an example, let us extract the entries made by our name node server log file whenever we perform some operations on our Hadoop. The first step is basically to define the flow. A Flume agent at a minimum basically comprises of a channel which joins the source and the sink together. So we have to define the sources, sinks and channels using the below lines of code. So here agent represents the name of our Flume agent. Sources are the names of the sources from where you want to retrieve data. Sinks are where you want to load the data, and channels are where you want to buffer your data before the sinks drain them. Each source, channel and sink has a unique name within the context of this agent. Note that we can configure multiple sources, sinks and channels by providing the names separated by a space. However, for the sake of understanding, we are taking just one source, sink and channel each. The names that we give here are what will be used to further configure each component. And in the case of the agent, it will be used to run our Flume agent from the command line. The common types of sources are an Avro file, netcat, which is a TCP event source, syslog files, exec. Basically exec executes a given Unix command that continuously produces data on the standard out. And we can also have custom sources, Twitter for example. The different sinks can be of type HDFS, could be HBase, Avro file, or it could even be a custom sink. And finally, the different types of channels are memory based, file based. We can have a JDBC channel, although it's not that commonly used, and then we can have a custom channel as well. So an important decision to make when designing your Flume data flow is what type of channel you want to use. The two most recommended channels are the file channel and the memory channel. The file channel is a durable channel as it persists all events that are stored in it to the disk. So even if the Java virtual machine is killed or the operating system crashes or reboots, events that were not successfully transferred to the next agent in the pipeline will still be there in the channel when the Flume agent is restarted. Whereas the memory channel is a volatile channel as it buffers events in the memory only. And if the Java process dies for reasons such as reboot or operating system crashes or anything for that matter, any events stored in the memory channel are lost. Since the number of events that can be stored is limited by available RAM, the memory channel's ability to buffer events in the case of a temporary downstream failure is quite limited. On the flip side, the file channel has superior buffering capability due to utilizing cheap and abundant hard disk space. And memory channel, because it buffers the events in memory, it provides high throughput as compared to a file channel. Now getting back to our example, let us configure our agent and its components, which is the source, sink and the channel. So here we are naming our agent as log to HDFS, and we are naming our source as the name node log source, the sink as the HDFS sink, and the name of our channel is mem channel. Next, as part of building the flow, we need to join the source and the sink through the channel. This can be done using the below lines of code. So observe the lines of code carefully. You can see that we have used plural for channel when we are trying to join the source to a channel, but singular when connecting a sink to a channel. The reason for that is that we can have a source delivering the events to multiple channels, but a channel can be drained only by one sink. So coming back to our example, let us join the source to the channel first. So we'll use this line of code for that purpose. So as you can see, setting up the property is hierarchical. With this line of code, you're actually saying that for the source name node -log -source, among all the sources of the agent log to HDFS agent, set the sources channel to mem channel, which is a memory based channel. Similarly, let us join the sink to the channel. Note that the hierarchy is also followed here as well. Now with that, we have defined the flow of our Flume agent. The data from the log file will be read by the source as events, which will then be forwarded to HDFS through a memory channel. Next, let us configure the individual components. Once the flow is defined, each of the components requires its properties to be set, which should be done in the same manner hierarchically as seen previously. Each component has its basic object type described by using the type property, which indicates a specific set of requisite properties for a component. These properties define how the component will act to perform the intended task. Now, the general syntax for configuring a source is something like this. Similarly for the sinks and for the channel as well. Note that it is hierarchical, starting from the agent, then you have the sources, then the individual source, then the individual property, and then the value of that property. So first, let us configure the source for our example. The first property that need to be set up is the type property, and we do this using this line. Note that the type indicates the type of the source, and we saw earlier that it can be an Avro source or a syslog file or an exec source where you can execute a Unix command. For our example, we will use the type as exec. Then depending on the type of the source, the properties that need to be set varies. Some properties are optional and some are mandatory. For exec source type, the command that needs to be executed is mandatory. So I set the command property using this line of code. So we will set this to the path of our name node server log, which is in my home directory under Hadoop and inside the logs directory. So this command tail -f is a command that kind of gives you a live view of the log file. As new lines are added to the end of the log file, they will be output to the console, that is stdout, and these new lines will be treated as events by the source and will be consumed and delivered to the defined channel. Here we are asking our Flume agent to keep looking for events generated by our name node server log stored in our Hadoop logs directory. You need to ensure that the user who is running the Flume agent has access to this particular file. For more properties that can be set for this type, you can always go to the Flume user guide documentation and check it out there. For our example, this is all we need to do to set up our source. Next, we will set up the sink. Similar to the source, the first important property to set up is the type. We can set the sink to be of type HDFS or HBase, Avro or other types, or even a custom sink as well. But in our example, as the name gives away, we are going to set the sink type to be HDFS. And depending on the type of sink, we can also set other properties, which you can check it in the Flume user guide documentation. But the mandatory property for a HDFS sink is basically the path. The path of HDFS is the path you have configured in the core site XML file. And note that the directory you specify should not already exist. So for example, we will set up the path that needs to be used by our HDFS sink to something like this, where localhost is our name node server and 54310 is the port on which the name node server listens to. and Flume is the directory where we want our events to be written into as a file. Of course, the Flume directory should not exist before we run this Flume agent. Next, let us configure our channel. As with the source and sink, we first configure the type of channel using the property below. This is the only mandatory property that needs to be configured for a channel. We can set other properties like capacity or the transaction capacity or the checkpoint file, etc., depending on the type of our channel. But for our example, we will just configure the type of the channel. Like the name indicates, the type of our channel is memory. Now, once we have done this, we have set up our Flume agent. We can add more to our agent configuration by adding multiple flows or configuring multiple agents even, and also configure multiple channels. You can do all of that if it is required in just this configuration file. But for our example, it is not mandatory. So with that, we have configured our Flume agent. So let us bring it all together. Let's see. So this is the configuration file that is used to move events in our nameNode server log file to HDFS. Now let us run our agent, that is log to HDFS agent, and see how it works. To run the agent, we need to first create the configuration file in the conf folder of our Flume directory. Let us see how to do this. Now let us connect to our virtual machine using PuTTY as HD user, which we have already done here while we were configuring Flume. Let me switch directories to conf and then look at the contents of this folder. So it has certain configuration templates, but it does not have a Flume configuration file for a Flume agent. So let us create one. So vi log-2-hdfs-agent.conf, and then let us paste the contents of the file. And then save and close. So just to recollect, this is where we have defined the individual components, that is the source, sink and channel. This is where we are actually defining the flow, saying that this particular source will write to this channel and this sink will drain this channel. And then we have configured the source. The type of our source is basically exec, which basically executes a command. In this case, we are trying to tail our nameNode server log file. And then here we configure the sink, and the type of a sink is HDFS, and we are basically configuring the path of the HDFS file where we want to write our events that are being generated. And finally, we are configuring the type of the channel as well, which in this case it is memory based. Now let's go ahead and save and close this file. Few things that we need to be really sure of is basically that the path of the file that we have provided, that is our nameNode server log, that should be correct, and that the Flume directory that we want to load the events to does not already exist in HDFS. So with that, we are now ready to run the agent. So let's see how to do that. So this is our Flume binary executable, and then we invoke the agent command and we type the name of the agent in the configuration file that we want to run, which is log-2-hdfs, and then we want to specify the path of the configuration file, which in this case is conf-. This is the command that we have to execute on our console. So let us see what this does. Alright, as you can see, it generates certain logs. As you can see here, it says that it is processing the HDFS sink and it has added the HDFS sink, and then you can also see that it has created a memory channel, and then you can also see that it has started the memory channel and started the sink, and finally it has also started our nameNode log-source, and you can see that it's already writing data into HDFS. You can see that it first creates a temp file before renaming it and then writing it into our HDFS directory. So as you can see, multiple files are being generated. So let us take a look at the contents of those files. So let me just initiate a new session. So you can launch multiple putty sessions with the virtual machine so that it is easy if you have multiple windows open. So let us go and check HDFS, and the directory we have configured is Flume. So as you can see, multiple files are being generated and the logs are being written. So let us quickly check the contents of one of the file. So as you can see, it's a typical server log entry in our name node server. So that is how we can extract data from a web server log as it writes the log entries. That is how we can move that data directly into our HDFS using Flume. So with that, we come to the end of our first example on Flume. It is a basic one, but one that gives us a strong foundation of how Flume works. And with that, we come to the end of this video, and we saw in a lot more detail how to configure a Flume agent to extract web server logs, and hope that it was very easy to understand, and now you can apply these concepts to more complex data flows and different sources as well. So thank you for watching.